Before we go in, I wanted to show you a picture of what Neilson is going to look like when they're finished. They've kept the facade and the structure of the old Neilson Library and have added on 2 new wings. It's been designed by Maya Lin, who designed the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's going to be a real showcase here on the campus and in Northampton. One of the most interesting things, I think, for our shoot today is that when this is done, the centerpiece of this library is going to be the archives, the rare books, and the Sophia Smith collection. It'll be a real jewel case for that collection. I'm here with Elizabeth Myers, who's the director of the Special Collections here at Smith College. She's been gracious enough to allow us to come in and film here in the archives. Archives have always been considered kind of a locked away, secret place in a library. And I think you're looking to make them more available. Is that so? Have more hands-on, allow public students more access to the archives.
That's true. We're a public facility, even though we're housed on the Smith campus, and we do support the teaching mission of the college. And in fact, we're very much intertwined with the mission of the college. But we are a public facility, and we serve researchers from the Northampton community, including students K through 12, as well as just community members who are interested, in various types of history. I mean, really, it's the story of Northampton becomes the story of Smith. The story of Smith is a part of the story of Northampton. These 2 things are linked, and we also host researchers from around the world. So from the new to the process to those more advanced scholars. Special collections are increasingly about the narrative of how people lived, not just the facts, right? So the diaries, the letters, the way in which people experienced their life and their challenges and their opportunities. All of that exists in the archives. It's the stories, the narrative.
Sure.
So, but archivists and librarians and curators have really, in the last 20 years, pivoted around the idea of being gatekeepers to being gateways. And if the goal of a special collections is just to store material to preserve it for future generations in the abstract, you'd save a lot more money, certainly in labor, if you just put it in a maintained attic and hoped for the best. We're all about access and use, and I think that's true across the profession.
How are you looking to grow the archives? What areas are you looking to expand? You'd use the term "where are the silences." I really like that. Where are you looking to grow the archives in the collection?
Great question, and in fact we're undergoing a collection development review process right now, which is a healthy way of taking a look at where are the collection strengths and where are the weaknesses, where are the silences, who have we not captured in the record, who have we captured enough of in terms of their voice or their story. So that's a process we're doing, and it takes a while. It takes some months to get through to really do it deliberately. I can tell you that historically there are 3 collections that make up Smith College Special Collections. Okay. There's the College Archives, which does exactly what you'd expect. Mm-hmm. It really documents the intellectual life, but also the life of students, administrators, really the life of the campus, going back to and even a little before its founding. Then you have the Mortimer Rare Book Collection, which is a wonderful teaching collection that is very diverse in its subject matter because it was built to be a teaching collection. We have strengths, of course, and we're probably most well known for having one of the most comprehensive Sylvia Plath collections, but there are many others as well. And again, it's very diverse. So we have from cuneiform tablets up to contemporary artist books. Yeah. So really thousands of years of sort of human intellectual creation.
Like you say, a teaching collection.
Very much a teaching collection.
And you do like your students to be hands-on with this stuff.
Absolutely. Unless you're using photographs, then we don't want you to have gloves on.
Beth, you've told us about the rare books and the college archives. The third part of the equation of your collections is the Sophia Smith collections. What is that? How does that fit into your archives and your rare books?
So the Sophia Smith collection is really the Sophia Smith collection of women's history. It is the oldest collection of women's history in the country and second oldest in the world.
Wow.
And we are among one of the largest collections. When it was first founded, which is really very early in the early 1940s, along this idea, this at the time a very radical, almost activist idea that while there were archives that were collecting many men, women were not seen as particularly valuable, or their records were not seen as valuable. So Smith College, being Smith College, decided to create a repository where those records could come and have a home and be safe and stewarded. So the early collection focused on suffrage and abolition, those incredible families where, for example, in the Garrison family or the Hale family, you have many of the men have been collected and by other institutions, but the women, the sisters, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, they had not. And so we were able to really, again, sort of step in and save that history. And we also, in the Sophia Smith collection, started very early collecting around women's reproduction and women's reproductive health and justice. So we have an incredible collection from before Margaret Sanger, including Margaret Sanger, through Planned Parenthood records here, and we're very excited about that. But we also collect around women's reproductive health, justice, and well-being, women of color, women from different parts of the country, not just the big national organizations and the more famous, but also those who are really doing community and grassroots activism on behalf of women. So it's a wonderful collection, and it's one, I think, that brings people here by the hundreds and hundreds every year, and it's one that we continue to seek to grow.
So you guys are known as the stewards. That's how you were introduced to me. What does steward mean? What do you do as a steward?
Yeah, I think it's a term that encompasses a lot of the things that we have in common with our job. Nancy and I are archivists, which means we work with unique and rare records, and Shannon is a curator of rare books. But for all of us at Smith College, we bring in new collections. We take care of the collections we have and think about their long-term accessibility. And we also do teaching with students in the Smith College and 5 colleges in the larger area.
Yeah. So it's sort of it's a good term to think of sort of the full range of what we do in terms of the stewardship of the collections across time and caring for but making them available and bringing in new materials that are in conversation with what we already have as well.
And I think that over time the term curator has sort of gives it this lofty sense, and also the sense of this is my domain and you're not allowed particularly to be here, whereas steward is much more open and really reflects the way that archives and special collections have changed significantly over time.
Absolutely. You asked me to pick some of my favorite objects, and that's a really hard thing to do because I think what's so powerful about archives are the ways that they interact with one another and that they tell bigger stories. So I'm going to show you 2 objects that I really, really love and let you know that there's a lot more where this came from. So this is a diary of Martha Coffin Wright. Martha Coffin Wright is a suffragist. She helped organize the Seneca Falls Women's Convention in 1848. And something that I really love about this diary is that it's documentation of her friendships and her family and her networks. And so she writes every day about what she's done and who she's encountered. And here something you can see is that her friend Harriet Tubman came and visited with her. Miriam Coffin Wright's daughter is Ellen Wright Garrison, and this is her book here. We call it the Hair Book. Ellen Wright Garrison was the daughter-in-law of William Lloyd Garrison. William Lloyd Garrison is an abolitionist. He had a newspaper called The Liberator. He's pretty well known in abolitionist circles. And something that I really like to think about here is the role of women in these abolitionist movements and in the movements after abolition of freedmen's rights and thinking about the rights of Chinese immigrants, of women's roles and women's networks. And so when you first look at this book, you think, what is going on here? Because what you see is hair, and it's it's a little bit creepy. Sometimes when I show this to students, they kind of want to go on the other side of the room. Others of them want to get really close.
Wow, that's cool.
And so this comes out of this Victorian habit of collecting locks of hair. Something to remember is that hair doesn't decompose, right? And so that it keeps a lot of the attributes of the living person who had it on her head. And so you would collect a lock of your friend's hair, perhaps because you didn't know the next time you would see them. Traveling to visit other folks took a long time. This is from the records of the Third World Women's Alliance, and the Third World Women's Alliance formed in Oakland, California. A lot of folks who came out of the civil rights movement, this was a black-led women's movement, and they were in reaction to both the patriarchy of the civil rights movement and the racism of the mainstream women's liberation movement. And I really love this collection because this is a collection of folks who were all volunteers and who self-documented themselves so much. So you can see in the larger collection minutes of meetings, extensive documentation of what they were up to. They had self-education committees because there was this idea of there can be no movement unless you really know your history. So there would be committees of folks who learned the history of African American women, of women in other parts of the world. And these are documents of a campaign that they had done called the Coalition Against Infant Mortality. And this was sort of based on an understanding of a particular hospital in Oakland, California was showing that the infant mortality rates for the babies of black women were much higher than the infant mortality rates of other women. And this was, you can see here, in black and white, what the campaign looked like to say, how are we going to get organized? Who are our partners going to be? How are we going to talk to the press? How are we going to think about this? And so you see document after document after document of planning and thinking through and figuring out, they even, I think they call it propaganda subcommittee. Like, how are we going to give our message forward in a way that people are going to really understand? So this particular document is from January 1978, and that was pretty much sort of the heart of when this group was active. So I really love documentation of activist organizations like this. We have a lot of it, and something that I find that it's really useful for is many people in their lives want to be active about some sort of a cause, and this is such a great opportunity to learn from the experts.
How did you come to have this here?
Yeah, this came to the repository, I think, about 20 years ago. This was based on relationships that we've built with activists throughout the United States, so that folks know that this is a place where you can put your history,
safe
and it'll be
yeah.
trustworthy. That's exactly right, and that will make this history known and that it's valuable to us.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, so when you asked for us to select our favorite item, I have to say that my favorite item is always what's in front of me at a given moment, because each object tells its own story. And to sort of pull one story out from the context that we have is quite a challenge. But I do have a favorite printed book, and I couldn't take this opportunity not to share it with you. So this is a copy of Micrographia from 1665. It was written by Robert Hooke, who was the first curator of experiments for the Royal Society in London. And it's a book about what you can do with a microscope. And this was a new technology at this period. And Robert Hooke was interested in sharing, it's almost like it's an advertisement for what you can do with technology, what you can do with a microscope, what you can learn. Unlike many of his colleagues in the Royal Society, he was not a wealthy man, and so he didn't go on all those journeys around the world learning about the natural history across the world. He was looking at what was going on in London itself. So that means that the things he was looking at were more the minutiae of life, and but what he did with it was he showed how beautiful it is. And he was a man who was both what we consider now a scientist, what they would consider a natural philosopher, but also a man of God. And so his interest was in showing how beautiful God's work could be. So if you're in London, 1665, one of the tiny creatures around you that you're going to be very used to constantly bugging you is a flea. So he takes this really obnoxious, horrifying creature that everyone hates, and he looks at it under the microscope, and he draws it with as much detail as possible, and then provides that drawing to an engraver, and he oversaw that engraving. So he was making sure it was as accurate as possible. He was really interested in accuracy. And then he included it in this book that he also wrote. So each section, there is a little bit on the creature or object that he's investigating, and then there are these beautiful fold-out plates. Some of the plates are not fold-out like this one, but one of the things I love about the fold-out plates, this one of the flea, and then I'll also show you the one of the louse, is that we're seeing these creatures that people were really unhappy about. Here's a louse grasping a strand of hair, so that connects to the hair book you saw earlier, perhaps. But it's at the scale of an elephant or a lion, and it's a louse, and it's a flea. So thinking about how he's elevating these creatures that people just found just infuriatingly annoying, but they're really beautiful to him, and because they're creatures of God. One of the things he does at the beginning here is he shows us what man-made objects look like in counterposition to what God's creatures look like. So you get the point of a pencil, you get a full stop, a period, a printed period, and a razor's edge, and you go deeper and deeper, and you look closer and closer, and it becomes uglier and uglier, misshapen, and you can see a period, printed period usually looks quite round and perfectly inked, but this looks like a great splotch of London dirt, he called it. So he's really exploring all of these things around him in this very detailed way. One of the things that we have to thank him for is the use of the word cell. When he was investigating cork, a piece of cork, he took a look at it under the microscope and thought it looked like a monastic living space, and so he said, "Oh, look at these cells," and that's how we got the term cell. So here's our cork cells right here.
Was he the first person to be using a microscope? Or
He was
did just
not.
kind of perfect?
He was not the first person to use a microscope. There were multiple people using them at the same time, but he was one of the first people to really write about it and show what you could do with it. At the same time, there were other microscopists that were at work, and they were sort of comparing notes and sharing drawings and letters across Europe. Van Leeuwenhoek, Malpighi, so various people in various parts of Europe, they were sharing information, but there was certainly some competition as well. One thing I want to show you as a book person, I really dislike seeing mold in books. However, here is a picture of book mold that I'm okay with seeing because it's an image. But it actually looks like a beautiful sort of almost Seussian forest, and it is just, some mold that you might find on a book. So he's really investigating in a really deep and dense way. So
He must have sold a lot of microscopes.
and the funny thing is, he wasn't a manufacturer of microscopes. He really just wanted people to learn and investigate into the natural world using the technology available to them at the time.
So I have to third the comment of both Shannon and Maureen that when we as stewards are asked to bring out something really cool, we immediately stop because almost everything that we have we think is cool. That's why one of the reasons why we're in the jobs we are in. But in the College Archives collection, this fan by a student named Ethel Fifield, class of 1895, is really unique for a number of reasons. Primarily because it contains photographic images that we're assuming she or her friends took of themselves, of faculty members, and she cut them out. These happen to be cyanotypes, so the printed image is printed on what is more commonly known as blueprint paper. And so that's why it has the wonderful blue hue that it does. She decided, selected her images. She was curating her photographic collection, and she placed them on a fan, which she then also created all sorts of little leaves around, and more than likely this image was placed on her room, one of her room's walls. What we see in the college archives with photographs of student rooms is that they contain a fantastic amount of photographs. You know, today everyone will pull out their phone and they'll take a look at they'll scroll through their photos on their iPhone or their Android. In 1890s and early 1900s, the students were plastering paper prints on their walls. And I wish if I had thought it through, I would have brought an image like that to show you, to see how it was done. But this is a fantastic.
Do you know who these people are?
I know some of them. These are faculty members.
Oh, okay.
These are top, and then the more informal images of students are, I'm assuming they are her friends. The sad fact is that we don't have an identified image of Ethel, so I can't say to you, oh, and here is the creator of this wonderful fan. But what we do have in the class of 1895 records are group photographs of the women. I don't know if this...
Yeah, that's better, thank you.
Yep. So this happens to be the class of 1895 in their first year. So for the mathematicians in the group, that is 1880, 90...
Not 1895, it'd be 1891.
1891. My colleagues are the mathematicians. So they are actually sitting in front of, this looks to be Hubbard House, which is still a student residence on campus. And just like today, when the first year students come in, they get their class photograph taken. That's what this is, just 100 plus years later. So the College Archives has a wonderful collection of group photos as well as the individual products that students can create. And what's really great about the photographic piece of the College Archives, particularly in this time period, this is the early phase of Kodak introducing the handheld camera. And when they created the first Brownie series of cameras, they were really targeting it and marketing it towards women because it was light, it had film already in it, and basically what you did, and as they said, is you snap the image, take 100 pictures, and then send it off, and they do the processing for you, return the prints as well as return a camera with film already in it for the next 100 images. And so Smith students were actively documenting every type of activity that they were engaging in throughout their time here. And also they took images where professional photographers couldn't go. They took them in their houses, in their student residences. They took them on their travels as students on Mountain Day to Hadley, to Amherst, to Mount Skinner, to Whately Glen, all over the place. And so simply by taking a look at the photographs that we have that are vernacular or self-made by the students, you can really get a good sense of what was going on in their lives.
Some great postcards in your reference room
Yes.
over there that
Yeah.
are just the best. They really capture what it was like
Yeah.
to be
So-
at Smith
So
College.
it's in conjunction with all of the paper materials that we have in the archives, the photographic images just really can create a stronger story. And then these are also pieces that everything is connected in the college archives.